Hey, hi everyone. Welcome back to today's episode of the Healthy Shift Worker podcast. Thank you so much for joining us. Today's conversation, we've actually got two guests joining us. All the way from Michigan, Detroit in the USA. We've got Dr. Grover from Grover Health and Aesthetics, and he's also got his lovely wife, Evita Singh, joining us. So it's going to be a special podcast today, having two people, or three of us having this conversation. Now, both are healthcare professionals, and both have had to navigate some of the many challenges of not only working shift work, but obviously both of them working shift work at the same time. So for the focus of today's conversation, we're going to be predominantly talking about that, along with touching on some of the mental health implications that can present working shift work and how it actually can impact on the dynamics of the partner and family life. So welcome, Dr. Grover and Evita. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Thank you, Audra. Appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, well, welcome back for you, Dr. Grover, because obviously you joined us on an earlier podcast. That was episode 107, and we were discussing some of the cautionary insights for shift workers. So for those of you who are joining us and haven't listened to that episode, I strongly recommend going back and listening to that one. That was a quite powerful conversation. So I guess before we launch into some of the questions, I'd really like to just get a little bit of a background from both of you from a perspective of how you both ended up doing shift work.
Sure. So I guess ladies first, and then I'll go ahead afterwards.
Okay. So yeah, I'm a radiologist, which basically here is a physician who interprets imaging and does some procedures. And when I initially was in medical school, deciding what job I wanted to do, what subspecialty I wanted to do my residency in, at the time, radiology was this no call, you go in, you read some studies, you can maybe do that remotely, you can do that in the hospital. But basically, when you kind of check out for the day, there's no pager that you need to carry. There's no really like ownership after you leave the hospital. So I really liked that, being able to leave work at work and then having time to spend with your family. And literally within the time that I entered residency through the time that I graduated, which is a 5-year training program in the US, plus the 1-year fellowship, imaging had gone up thousandfold. And even when I was in residency, there was an expectation that there be a radiologist, not just a resident, but the actual attending staff in-house 24 hours a day to provide final interpretations for patients that were in the emergency room or in the hospital. And so this concept of PRN interpretation, as you will, versus immediate on-site final reads really changed in the last, from now, about 30 years to really changing radiology to a 24-hour-a-day specialty. We may not carry the pager, but there's always someone in the hospital or somewhere who is reading those images, essentially real time while patients wait in the ER, wait in the hospital. And that's kind of become the standard of care practice in the US. So in residency, we were doing 14-hour shifts in-house. We would show up at 5 p.m. and stay until 7 a.m. or later, depending on if we weren't done with our work for the evening. And then we would come back in. We would do that over 7 days. And then the rest of your residency was obviously mostly day shifts. And so that's kind of how the whole shift work became as part of my training program. But then also when I became staff after finishing fellowship, my job for the last 10 years also is included doing a 3 to 11 shift or a 11 to 7 a.m. shift, depending on assignments for the day. So not what I expected when I joined, but really how the profession has changed.
Yeah, amazing. So you're an accidental shift worker.
Yeah.
Not intended to be one.
And I think a lot of healthcare professionals here have shifted to that. Like the hospital systems have kind of shifted to this concept of a hospitalist or nurses being on these 12-hour shifts versus like day nurses versus night nurses. There's hospitalists for OBGYNs now. There's all sorts of specialties where it's become this, you work either an evening shift or a day shift, or you flip-flop and rotate. And it's really changed, I think, kind of the way that practice for us has been since when we entered the profession to where we are today.
Right. Thank you. Keshav, do you want to do the same?
Sure. So, when I was growing up, as I kind of, I think, mentioned in the first podcast that we did, my father, being an emergency medicine doctor, he worked all sorts of shifts, overnight, evening, day, sometimes double shifts, and even Evita has had to do those double shifts too in the past as well too, um, whether she liked it or not. And so I kind of had this impression that medicine was this 24-hour gig, essentially, that you were getting into. So I kind of understood that at a young age, that whether it was 2 in the morning or 2 in the afternoon, you as a physician could be expected to work. Now, as I kind of matured, then I wanted to go into even like neurosurgery, for example. And when we first started our relationship, that quickly kind of became something that was off the table because my passion wasn't as strong to say, okay, I'm going to dedicate my whole life to this, to versus having a lifestyle and doing other things that I enjoy that can have an equal or even in some cases a larger impact on society too for well-being. Um, and so I then went into medical school, and then after medical school I decided to do ear, nose, and throat and head neck surgery, which the training itself, was it's a pretty rigorous training in terms of overnight shifts or 24 hours shifts, followed by rounding and then maybe having to go to the operating room after you've done rounds. And, you're sitting there and expecting to operate even the next day on these complicated head and neck cancer patients, where you're taking out cancer, you're reconstructing the head and neck. And this is after having worked a 24-plus hour shift. You're scrubbing into this case now that, would probably be maybe 12 hours itself or more, or having to do other cases. So I experienced that for my training. And then with just the way that time went and my decision to pursue that integrative and functional medicine, I think was a blessing in the sense where then I was able to kind of part ways with the shift worker lifestyle. But it's interesting in terms of that. But us being husband and wife, we're also parents. And one thing that I think that oftentimes is kind of um, underrepresented is even if you're not a shift worker or you're not in healthcare, or let's say you're not a 911 dispatcher and working a night shift or something of that sort. Um, if you have a kid and you're not sleeping well at night because a baby is crying or because they need to be fed, or for some reason they woke up from a bad dream and now your sleep is interrupted. And actually, if you look at Dr. Sachin Panda from, I believe he's out of the Scripps Institute in California. I may have that wrong in terms of where he's at, but I know he's out of California. His work defines being a shift worker with even having, I believe it's a 2 to 3 hour differential in your normal circadian rhythm, in terms of where even if you miss your sleep window by, I think it's even as little as like 90 minutes or something of that sort, that you become into that shift work kind of sleep cycle. So I think, I don't think it necessarily has to be that you're a worker. I think it can be that you're a shift human being, whether you're employed or life has that kind of situation for you where you're either a parent, you're maybe you're a kid taking care of an elderly individual, maybe you're taking care of a sibling who needs a little extra help, or a friend, and that's affecting your sleep. Or it's also interesting that I live in a suburban town, pretty quiet at nighttime. Recently, I was in New York City visiting family, and it's interesting. I was on the fifth floor of the condo building in the busy streets of Manhattan, and I even told the Vito when I came back. I was like, now I get why people in New York are stressed and they want to leave, because you can't sleep there at night. With fire engines going off, police cars, people yelling in the street till like 2 in the morning. You almost need to put like sound blocking headphones in to really get into that zone. And I think we are pretty spoiled actually being in a suburban town where you can go to bed at nighttime and not worry about the ambient municipality noise being an issue for your circadian rhythm. And in these towns, or even, unfortunately, with geopolitical events, with war, I mean, you have bombs going off, you have sirens going off, you have, God knows what going on in whichever, war torn country you may live in. You're a shift human being then too. So I think there's many, many ways in which circadian rhythm shift affects people. And I think specific to shift workers, it's something that you're kind of voluntarily getting yourself into, if that makes sense, from that perspective. So yeah,
Mm.
and
Yeah.
that's kind of my that was kind of my story and kind of my recent revelations of,
Mm.
well, hey, wait a minute, it's, you may not, you don't necessarily have to be in the hospital or whatnot to experience the same physiologic effects in that sense.
Yeah, I think that's a really powerful point, Keshav. And I think even Dr. Sachin Panda is kind of alluding that most of society these days is becoming shift workers. And obviously, that all came about from the invention of the light globe, where we are now awake when we weren't, hundreds and hundreds of years ago. But obviously, we've got all these electronic gadgets, a lot of them that we're addicted to. So we're staying up in the middle of the night when we should be sleeping. And yeah, I remember a girl I worked with, she came in. Had a new baby as well, and we had a 3 a.m. start. 3 a.m. start. Yes, that is true. And she said she came in and she's only had about an hour and a half sleep. And I just thought, wow, like, and that was, we weren't operating on people. Like, we weren't doing surgery kind of stuff that you're doing with life in your hand. So I think whilst it has become a little bit of an accepted norm, and certainly I can resonate with the New York, what you're saying. I think we need to be sometimes making different choices, because it's not really sustainable to kind of be living the sort of the lifestyle that shift work kind of can present. But I remember reading, though, that you did experience shift work, or should I say physician burnout, Keshav, and that was obviously due to a bit of the work, the hours that you were working, which were quite extraordinary, and along with a bit of a toxic hospital work environment. Can you just shed a little bit of light on that for us? Because I think there's probably going to be
Sure.
listeners that can resonate with that.
So I think that, the first of all, like I will say that when you do work those hours, your gut brain axis completely gets thrown off. And so, I remember experiencing basically irritable bowel syndrome. To be very blunt, in terms of during residency, where you would even have, and I remember even one specific day, which was terrible for me physiologically, where I was on call, and then the next morning I was expected to present a grand rounds lecture, PowerPoint style, to the whole department. And so, and as I'm finishing my call, your pager's going off, you're having to go to the emergency room, deal with an emergency, and then also, in the back of your head, in an hour and a half or 2 hours, I think it was, I had to be in front of my whole department, my department head, and even, some of the more stickler professors who will, even comment if you tied your shoes the incorrect way, in that respect, in terms of your presentation style, what font you used, or other things that were just that didn't really help um, the point of giving a presentation. And that too, like, the very fact is, you're going to have a resident or anyone really present after an overnight shift. That just makes no sense in terms of who are you really helping.
Mm.
You're not helping anybody by doing that. That just doesn't make any sense. So, like, those are certain examples. And then obviously, with corporatized medicine, you have a lot of the decisions that are being made that are not being made for the individual, for the patients. They're being made for the bottom line of the hospital. The medical center I worked at had one of the largest children's hospitals in the state, and they would they decided that it was a smart financial decision to fire every social worker except one, to fire all the chaplain and clergy, and all the social staff that was required for these, arguably inner city children and families that needed help during dire times of their life. Kids that have cancer, they're going through life-threatening illnesses, or even trauma like motor vehicle accidents, gunshot wounds, things like that happen in the inner city. And as a business decision, this corporate behemoth has made this decision to care more about their bottom line than the people they serve, right? It's almost like if you went to Starbucks to get a coffee and they said, well, it's costing us a little bit too much to have like actual cups. Why don't you just take your hands out and hold the coffee in your hand and then drink it in your hand? It doesn't make any sense. Like, how can you do that? Like, you want to at least give your consumer a cup to hold to drink their coffee. And so that's the kind of stuff that I was seeing. Even, bloodied instruments on technically clean trays, or where you were given inferior equipment to use because that was the business decision that they were making. And so this is where all that toxicity came into play, where you're basically asking your workers to do a certain job. You're giving them less resources. You're making the patients' lives harder. And so what do you expect to happen to your physician base? They're not going to have that same thrust that they had coming in, and they're going to be just in survival mode the whole time. And even my brother, he's a shift worker, arguably, because sometimes he does have to work into the later evening and whatnot. And he complains about it all the time, even at a suburban, pretty well-to-do socioeconomic base hospital. And so we're seeing this everywhere. And so that's kind of part of what I experienced, to answer your question. And then also in terms of, it just was, from every angle, it was an unhealthy situation where, you're being told like, hey, great job, etc. Or like, you're not being given appropriate communication about what's going on. You're being expected to do things that are inappropriate for your role. And then you're given these kind of like minimal resources to do that. Minimal might be even generous in saying that. So, yeah, I mean, like, that was my situation. And so that's also when I decided to pursue something that would be more meaningful in the form of integrative and functional medicine. And so that's my story, kind of in a nutshell, there.
Yeah, and I guess that's, you have to kind of come up to make that decision. Either you just keep soldiering on through that, or you just think, no, this is being very hypocritical for me helping people, and I can't help it myself. So, yeah. So I guess, Evita, looking back at that time, and how was it for you seeing your husband going through that, and have you experienced it, something similar as well for yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of the challenge was that even though I had done residency, so I had finished training before he had started his. And so um, I was pretty fortunate to be surrounded with kind of the opposite training situation where, yes, I had very long hours and we had a lot of, like, in radiology, it's about how many cases and how many patients and how many procedures you're doing. We had a lot. I was at a community hospital. There were no fellows, so all the residents really got to get their hands dirty. But the attendings, or the staff, were working in the trenches with us. It wasn't fully put on the residents, and we had a lot of people with really great work ethic, and overall, like, a very collegial hospital system, as well as a very collegial department, which is why even after doing fellowship, I returned and worked there, because I recognized that it was kind of this family situation. So, it made it almost harder to see his situation, because I was like, this isn't like this everywhere. I do think things have changed kind of across the country. And I think what we've talked about with the corporatization of medicine and the business bottom line has changed most places. And I think even, where I was, I think the residents have not suffered in the same way, but like, there's so much pressure put on a lot of quality metrics that are kind of really not relevant to patient care in the end, but that's what's being tracked. And so there's a lot of minutia that needs to be done that takes away from actual, you guys have seen it as patients. I'm sure people who've gone to the doctor now realize like the amount of time you used to spend with the doctor talking has now reduced to a lot, not because they're not busy, they're more busy, but because their time is taken away from the actual patient care and put into all of these other things. So it did make it hard because I knew it wasn't a good fit, you know, and I wished we could have gone back in time and changed like the process of picking what's a good fit and where you're really going to go and the culture of the place that you're going to train in. And it's really hard as a student to know that without, you know, a lot of personal experience. In medical training in the US, you're only really given a year to kind of make that decision, and you're busy in that year. So it's really hard to know what to do. So it did make it very, very difficult to watch it happen. And then at some point have to say like, yeah, this is not safe for you or anybody. And so we're just going to have to like move on and make the best of the situation that's there and go from there. So yeah. So it didn't make it any easier, I think, because I came from such a different background.
Yeah. I think we just saw your daughter walk in the background there.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Really is showing that this is a real family podcast. This one.
Yeah.
I mean, it is. It's. I mean, it's. At least it's heartening to hear that there are places that are, you know, better to work, and it's just a matter of finding those places. Because at the end of the day, like our health and well-being is way more important than anything. So I'm glad to hear that you had a much better experience, Evita.
I definitely did, and I think, you know, I'm very thankful for the circumstance that I had, because I think it was, and when I talk to other people, somewhat atypical though, unfortunately. So yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I need to give her a microphone as well. So I guess the other thing that I wanted to talk about is for both of you, and I know the timing, some of you are working, you're not necessarily always working shift work at the time together, but when you were, how did you navigate that? Because obviously you've got the pressures of the job, but if you're not able to be spending quality time with your other half or your partner, how did you navigate that?
I guess I'll talk to that. So when he was in residency, and I was working, I at least had the benefit of, I knew what it was like, right? So I think that's one thing of a lot of times there are dual physician couples, because it's like the only person who empathizes with you, or like, you know, nursing or healthcare couples, because they know what it feels like to be tired and to be post-call and to be cranky. And you know, honestly, I had several coworkers that had husbands or, you know, wives who were in opposing shift work careers, like 2 separate practices, ER, radiology, anesthesia, and they're juggling everyday shift and childcare. Like my one friend had 3 children, you know, and her husband was ER and she was a radiologist. And I was like, what on the earth have you done? And every week was like, who's working what, and essentially, you know, she ended up also changing her job to a totally different aspect of our profession, only because she was like, at the end of the day, Nanny was raising my children, and that's not why I had them. So she had to kind of make her own decision. But yeah, so when we were doing it together, I could understand that I didn't have the expectations for him to be home at 5 o'clock or to cook dinner or to do dishes, or, you know, I kind of knew like, okay, I'm just going to take all of that on my plate. We didn't have children at the time. And I really was like, you know, you just need to go to work early, be on time, and come home late. And it is what it is, because I had that understanding. But I think if I did it, it would be really difficult to watch someone go through that and be like, oh, we're newly married. Where are you? You know, what's going on? Like, I want to go do this. I just kind of lived my own life. Like I would come home and hang out with friends and do things just knowing that he was working, and that was fine. Yeah. When I was on night shift, you know, would be the more like, if I was on the nights and then he was in the days, you know, it kind of became this thing of like, okay, I sleep in this room, you sleep in that room, like wear your earplugs, wear your eye mask, don't wake me because I only have a certain number of hours of sleep, and vice versa. And having to be really careful of that. And to this day, I mean, like I said, I have stopped doing evenings as of 10 months now, but up till 10 months ago, it was very much the same. Like when I would come off of a night shift, I would go to the basement, sleep in the room in the basement, put in my earplugs and my eye mask, and hope that the closing and opening of the door would not wake me, because I found with each passing year, I woke more easily. Like when I was in training and was, in my 20s, like young 20s, I could sleep pretty well and wake up and have like a good 8 hours between shifts and sleep almost that whole time and just go to work, go to sleep, go to work, go to sleep. And I could not do that as I got into my 30s and now 40. I just really like could not sleep more than 3 hours unbroken. And that feels completely different. You feel that on your body much faster. And so, we did have this system of like, I'm sleeping in the basement. I got my whole system. Don't come down there. You can't work out down there. So, we had an understanding, but we have one child, and that also made it very difficult. People always tell you when you do nights and you didn't call as a doctor, having kids is the same, and it's not the same. Anyone who's gone through both sides of that will say it's not quite the same because there's no recovery period. Normally your post-call day, or you're like after, you might be able to just take it easy, watch TV, eat whatever you want, exercise. But when you have to take care of a child who has no understanding of what you've been through in the night, it adds even another layer of fatigue and frustration and short temper, and all the things that are negative about being shift works gets amplified. So again, we had rules, and like I would park my car up the road so she could not see that I was home, and then go to sleep, because if she knew I was home, she's going to look for me. I still have, honestly, she's still very like, mom's here, where are you? And I think that comes with a lot of working mothers in general, is like this biological need to spend time with your mom is a little different when your mom is outside the home half the day or most of the day. So that's kind of how we made it work. Again became very challenging in the last year, and which is why I made the change in my own profession to get out of doing shift work. But it's tough. It's definitely not easy.
Yeah. I mean, I think I remember even like last year, or even I think it was Thanksgiving 2022. I remember she was working a week of nights, and she was like, I feel like a cancer has broke inside of me.
Yeah.
And
I felt that.
Yeah.
I deal with, I'm a radiologist, and majority of my specialty is oncology, so I believe that stress and all that does contribute to immunity changes, which then can, we're all growing little cancers all the time, and our body's just keeping them at bay, and those kinds of things change. And I was like, yeah, you see all these patients who are young who have cancer, and they're under all kinds of stress, and you can sometimes think like, every day I'm under such stress. This is what happens. Like it's going to happen if I don't change something about my life, And that's kind of when I made that Thanksgiving is when I started looking for other jobs, because it just felt so wrong. Like I've done this now for, at that time, 15, 16 years between training and like being an attending. And I was like, can I do this for another 25? Like, I don't think so. It was much easier without a child and being, and having other expectations in life. So I had to make that decision for myself, and I'm happy. I miss so many things about my previous job that I just mentioned. The people and the culture was really great, but I don't miss the evenings and the midnights and the weekends, and the flip-flopping between 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. Frequently was very difficult. I think the week before I gave my notice, I was on nights again, and I had slept a total of 15 hours. I just couldn't sleep. I was sick. She was sick. He was sick. It was like, and then you feel that, and you're like, this is what they talk about when they talk about burnout. This is like, you can't shut your brain off, and you're cycling. And then, people always ask me, how are you doing now that you've switched jobs and it's been a year? And I'm like, honestly, like I didn't believe, not that I didn't believe in burnout. I didn't believe that it would be me. I knew there were physicians going through all this, and healthcare workers and other professions who feel that. I just didn't think that would ever be me. And then after leaving, I realized like it took me 6 months to feel like a little bit back at peace and sleeping well again, and like on some sort of normal cycle where, you go to sleep at a normal time, you wake up at a normal time, and you feel well rested, and you're eating better, and like you have time to take care of yourself. And that was like a pretty big reality check as to that I made the right decision despite so many other things that I missed, right? That's the core. It doesn't matter about anything else if you're not healthy, mentally healthy and physically healthy.
So looking back at the journeys that you've both been on, if you, I guess, some advice for people that might still be very much in the thick of what you both went through, or even they're just about to graduate from university and embark on the start of their careers, what advice would you give to those people?
I think it's one of those things where I don't want to discourage anybody because I think that there is still good in medicine, and specifically if somebody is pursuing medicine, and if something that brings them joy and that's the only thing that they want to do. But I think at the same time, there are some things that if you have a routine in terms of on your like post-call days, what are you doing? Are you doing rejuvenating activities, catching up on sleep? Are you exercising? What's your nutrition like? Making sure that when you enter the arena of shift work, you kind of have somewhat of a plan. You know that, okay, if it's at nighttime, you're going to be avoiding like hyperpalatable foods because we know that what that can do to cortisol. And if your cortisol is also unbalanced through the day, that can create more stress and fatigue and things like that. I think there's a whole host of things to be aware of that, the knowledge that has even come out in the past 3-4 years or even 5 years wasn't there at least as available when I trained, and I'm pretty certain it wasn't as available when she trained, or even all the way back to when my dad trained. And I think that medicine's also changed quite a bit. I mean, when my dad trained, there was a lot less like paperwork, charting, and things like that you have to do. So he could see in the emergency room 120, 130 patients and felt very satisfied. His level of job satisfaction, even till today, he's in his 80s. He still attends virtually grand round Zoom. He still does telemedicine. He still is seeing, he still does like phone calls with his medical students that want to come and rotate with him because he loves what he does, because he was in a generation where burnout and shift work and things like that weren't as taxing as they have become. And even arguably, he kind of also got the opportunity to stop doing evening and nights and was more in his outpatient clinic and whatnot. So, he was from a different generation. But from today's generation, my advice would be the more prepared and more of a plan that you have. Sorry about that. Then you will be more successful. But also to know, it's that there are more resources out there to help, and there's nothing wrong with asking for help, because the more that you are equipped, the better you can be as a healthcare worker.
Yeah, I'll second that. I mean, when I think about, I thought I was pretty healthy the way that I did things when I was young, but honestly, I would like get there. We had to log in at 5 o'clock or like check in. So you'd go turn your computer on. I'd walk down to the cafeteria because we had like a little stipend, and I would pick up the 16 ounce of Mountain Dew. And that would be my like treat to myself. And I would go upstairs and I would nurse that Mountain Dew for that 14-hour shift. I mean, I would sip a little. It was like my own IV of caffeine, I guess, is the way you could look at it. And I would most of the time never finish it, but it was kind of like my routine. And so for 5 years, like every time I was on call, the amount of Mountain Dew I consumed is something I would never do now. Right now, understanding what we know about sugar and like caffeine intake and how it does affect your sleep the next day. So as I again move through my career, it'd be like I wouldn't have that coffee anymore. Like when I would get to work, I wouldn't have that. I would just force myself to like, stay awake throughout the night and stuff. And then Valora, this is not appropriate. I'm so sorry. But I think that the information, we just didn't have it. We didn't have podcasts like yours. We didn't have social media in the way that it's there now. I mean, now There's fatigue management taught to the residents, and it's not perfect by all means because it's another thing on their plate of things to do, and it's mostly taught on some like webinar that they just have to click through. But it is, the information is available, and medical education specifically, and I think a lot of professions have really come a long way in trying to make it like a little bit easier, quote unquote, on the person. But then there's a loss to the education, right? Like these shifts and patient care and everything. It's really flip flopped. I agree. If medicine is your passion, I mean, I have no regrets about like what I do. I do love like the patient care part of what I do, and I'm glad that I picked the profession that I did. But I think both of us are examples of how there are options and there are ways to stay in your profession. And I think especially after COVID, specific to healthcare, but I think a lot of professions, companies have been forced to reassess how they cover, what kind of jobs they offer, what kind of flexibility they offer. And especially for me, like market had completely changed. And that's why I was able to make a move and not have to do shift work anymore, because our whole profession has undergone a complete basic revamp of how it's done, whether it was by choice or just, again, by market availability. Now people graduating don't want to do, one on, one off weeks of shift work. They say, okay, if I'm going to do the night shift, I want to do 2 weeks off of recovery time and 1 week on. And maybe there's a slight decrease in income, but the quality of life may be better. Or if I'm going to do a weekend, then I need to have guaranteed my next weekend off. I cannot work 21 consecutive days, right? So we felt like when the market was different when we graduated, and healthcare, you're under this expectation of you just have to do what the boss tells you. It's not like that now for new graduates. COVID forced a lot of people out of healthcare, and now people who want to work have a lot of autonomy with how they want to set their jobs up, which is very, very different. So I think, ask. If you don't feel happy in the situation that you're in, like come up with a solution that could maybe make it better. I always kind of believe that everyone has a right to complain and everyone has a right to say that they're not happy. But if you don't have solutions, or you yourself don't think about solutions, it's very hard to actually like make the change. So, if you see like, oh, there's a way we could restaff things, or does everyone have to come in-house every day? Could we do some remote work to save people a couple hours of commute time? I think a lot of companies are doing that, and it's okay to ask for that. What's the worst that can happen? They say no. And if they say no, then you deal with it. But at least you've asked, or you go find another job that suits your choice better, which really is what's happening right now. So it's not hopeless by all means, and I think people have done a really good job with educating everyone, on how to kind of be healthier. So
that's great to hear that. Obviously, there's changes that are being put in place, because I think otherwise it's almost a little bit hypocritical, isn't it, for the healthcare sector to be putting so much pressure under their staff, not encouraging them to be healthy. And they're the ones that, you guys are the ones that are saving the lives, and so they need to be healthy.
yeah.
And I
Well,
sort of
that's the
think,
greatest paradox. Like every hospital serves the unhealthiest food. You know what I mean? We always joke about that, right? Like,
yeah.
why is Mountain Dew my only option at 7 p.m. at night, like out of the vending machine? If we, it was always a joke amongst all of the. It still is. Like, we still don't get the best, resources to your own staff, but it's just the nature of how it is. So you have to make your own choices now. Little things like blue light glasses when you're driving home. I mean, all of that, we knew nothing about that when I was in training. But now, if the days that I was working evenings, I would have those, and I would put them on the last couple hours of my shift and drive home wearing them to hopefully reduce some of that stress to the brain to be able to like kind of fall asleep a little bit easier. So stop
I'm glad
taking
that you brought that
melatonin.
up. Yeah, I'm glad that you
Yeah.
brought that up, Evita, with the glasses, because it is something that I recommend with my clients as well. So you don't wear them throughout your shift. You're just saying that you'll put orange ones on. Are they more or the lighter sort of yellow ones that you're using 2 hours before going home? Because obviously you don't want to make yourself too
Yeah.
sleepy.
I don't. Yeah, I don't, thankfully, I have not yet worn corrective lenses in my life. So it's a little hard for me to like wear glasses the whole time. I'm just not as like used to having a
Sure.
face.
Yeah, yeah.
So I think, yeah, I think some people wear blue light glasses. I'm still in front of a computer all day, so people will wear them all day, and I'm definitely not one of them just because of habit. But I do a lot of procedures, so I am up and down from the computer. Like, I'm not constantly staring at it, so I think that gives me some relief. But yes, during the evening shifts, I did buy a couple pairs, keep them in my bags, and then at least try to remind myself, like, okay, your shift is over at 7, like it's now 5 a.m., 4:30, like you can wear them for 2 hours. And then on the drive home, we were just talking about, daylight savings. So in the middle of the winter, it's not so bad because you drive home in the darkness, and then you just kind of crawl into bed and it's cold out and you get into a warm bed and you feel better. But in the summer here, leaving at 7 a.m. is full daylight. So even a 10-minute drive, you're like blasted by the sun. It's after sunrise. So, whether the glasses really work or not, there's no harm in doing it. And I mean, it's really hard to scientifically prove that on yourself unless you really feel a change. So I did that. And then obviously the magnesium and things like that, I had started adding again later in my life, like in my late 30s, rather than doing it in my 20s, which I think now people are just educated about uh, what to take. I didn't take melatonin early on, and then a couple of my colleagues were very into taking melatonin. So I went through a couple years where I tried to do melatonin, and then, it worked, didn't work. Sometimes I felt more awake. So I stopped doing that. And obviously now there's more evidence to support, not using melatonin in specific situations as such. So, and that's more, patient specialty, but yeah, so I kind of tried a lot of that stuff. It's funny, we used to, like, you knew a week of nights was coming up, and so when you were in your 20s, you would just go to the bar till 4 a.m. the night before so that you could shift yourself over. I can't do that now. I mean, there's like no way I would survive. But even in listening to Dr. Pandey's podcast, Keshav had sent me one of the ones about the circadian rhythms, and it was like, yes, before you go on a week of nights, you should like sleep extra the few days before. And I was thinking about how we did the absolute converse so that we could be really tired so that we could just shift our bodies over quickly. But again, we didn't have that knowledge. No one was giving us that kind of education, on how to go into your night shifts well and do that.
I think that knowledge base is so important because even now with the advent of like things like this podcasts, social media, if you follow certain people, that I think is so empowering because it's on demand, relatively free, inexpensive advice and kind of a guide to living a better life. I mean, I remember when I was a resident, she would send me a couple podcasts here or there, but I didn't really get into podcasts much until after, when we would go on like a road trip or something, and I would start listening to what she was listening to. And then I was like, oh, this is interesting. There's all these different podcasts out there because, again, I didn't have the time. And I actually, if you posted something about health and wellness on Instagram or Facebook and your program found out that you were doing that as a resident when I was training, and I'm pretty sure it was also true when she was training, you were dinged because that meant you had more time on your hands to do a post versus working. Or that, it wasn't like, it was kind of frowned upon that, like, who are you to be like giving like advice when you're in training, etc., versus just talking about your day, versus now that's much different. So
yeah, I mean, it is just so different, all the information that we have. So I think it's and also along the lines of medical education that we were talking about shift work, I think shift work is going to become more and more the standard. Most residency programs do this 12-hour on, 12-hour off. That was even less common when we were training. So more this concept of versus what he did with the 24-hour and then like a little bit of rollover to where 36 hours is kind of okay. Now just like, okay, you're here for 12, you're home for 12, you're here for 12, you're home for 12, to kind of make you not be in the hospital as many hours. But that is true shift work then, that's the true shift work. So it'll be interesting to see how people adjust to that as well. But having been on the other side of it now, I just can't imagine like having to ever go back. I don't know how I did it for that long. It really like is just the exact same.
It's tough. So, well, I want to throw something hypothetical at you then. So if You both were asked or invited to come on board in a hospital as consultants to overhaul the health and well-being of their staff. Let's say you have an unlimited budget. What would you
Yeah.
recommend? What would you recommend that the executives of the hospital do when it comes to, because the ultimate goal, I know it's all about, it is making money, but we want to pull back a bit from that and think it's patient care here should be our number one priority. And in order for that to happen, our staff need to be their health and well-being. What sort of things would you like to recommend, just being the
He's gonna.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, I think one of the hardest things for people to deal with right now, that, if I could overhaul it, is most physicians and healthcare providers know what they need to do to be efficient. They themselves know what's lacking, what's adding to their own headache. Like the
Yep.
EMR is inefficient.
Yep.
There's a lack of like medical assistants and nursing assistants, good nurses make everyone more efficient, and you can see more patients with higher quality if you have a good support staff, rather than cutting all that support staff down and putting in, people who maybe like don't want to be there or who are under different duress. So yeah, I think that's a huge thing, is like, um, is really listening to the people who are doing the work tell you what they need to be more efficient. None of us, I know for a fact, no one who is in healthcare wants to watch patients wait unnecessarily, not get results on time, not have their families communicated with, not get the best care possible. We all want that. Like every single person wants that for their
Yeah.
patient. And none of us want to spend all this time doing non-patient care related expectation things that are part of our job, that are just like I honestly spent, I think it was like 12 hours in the last 2 weeks just doing modules for like safety for this and security system, and don't forget about HIPAA compliance. And I'm not saying that's not all important. It is, but 90% of people who are doing it are just clicking through the boxes, right? You're just trying to get through it. And I would say, hey, you give everyone a day off from patient care, you rotate it through, you go into an auditorium and you go through all this stuff, what's important for them. Everyone's more engaged, they hear it, they all get the day time away from patient care versus trying to do it between, oh, it's due tomorrow. Like, okay, let me try to get this in, while I'm trying to interpret studies or see a patient or do a biopsy. And I know it sounds awful to say, but that's everyone. That's how we all are surviving this right now. And I see it even with the residents who are in training, because they have like so many things they have to tick box that aren't related to learning how to take care of patients, which is really what their primary job is supposed to be. And I think this is, I guess, what's this called? Red tape. All the red tape or all of that stuff, it just needs to be cut back out. EMR was supposed to be efficient for everyone, electronic medical records. It's for the most part not, like I think there's always a disconnect between software and the users. Like in anything that we have out there, there's just 100 other ways to make it more efficient. Like you talk to any doctor who could pick, would you rather just handwrite your note like the old days or have to do all this clicking and formulate something that's billable? Everyone would rather go back to the old way. It's crazy that we have all this like ways to make it more efficient, but no one feels like it's added to efficiency. It's taken away from all of these things. So yeah, I think if I had unlimited resources, I'd say you just overhaul it. You completely change how everything is done, from how a patient makes an appointment to how they're discharged. There's just so much redundancy right now that we see that is, inexplicable in a way. Like it just doesn't make any sense with all the technology that we have, that we're still in healthcare specifically so far behind on getting things to just be like, I'm sure, why if I get an x-ray in Ohio, is that information not readily available to someone in Michigan, so that if I have to go there or I'm traveling, that they don't have to repeat my whole thing again, or like try to track someone down to get a report or send a disc. And there's just so many things that that add to all of it all adds up. 30 seconds, 30 seconds, 30 seconds, 30 seconds.
Yeah.
And next thing you know, you're hours of your day, of your life, of,
Mm.
your whole thing. So, I would say, I know that was a long answer to that, but I think just letting people suggest ways to control their own efficiency so that your work inside your job is more productive and higher quality and with better results, so that the time they have outside is more restorative and more providing for their family and taking care of their mental and physical health, then you're going to have overall success on both ends of those on those spectrum.
I like that. There's focusing on really what does matter is super important, and also hearing from the staff, like making them feel as though they're being heard, as opposed to a bit of a one-way street. You must kind of be doing it this way. It's going to cause a bit of angst already, isn't it? Because I can hear it in your voice, Evita, where, the frustration kind of thing that it comes, but that you have to do it. It's a part of the process. And ticking and flicking this online course, when you do crave, particularly after, the last, 4 years, we do crave and learn better, I think, with that human interaction. As opposed to the online. So, Keshav, do you have anything to add and to that?
In terms of if we were like consultants to the hospital or to a health. Well, I think if I've meditated upon this quite a bit, and at the end of the day, a lot of it boils down to what the bottom line of a organization in terms of how is that organization being paid, and a lot of this comes down to the insurance companies. So I think the very first part of it, if it was unlimited budget and whatnot, I would renegotiate what is required to get coverage for your patients in the hospital, number one. I would also clean up a lot of the unethical fiscal practices that occur by insurance executives. Just right. I don't know all the details. I haven't read the article in depth, but I did see a snippet of a headline about the United Healthcare CEOs trading stocks because they knew that they would get benefit by trading those stocks earlier, and they came out, I think, $100 billion richer because they made stock trades on the insurance stock portfolio, which really affects patients. When you're looking at these executives who are being paid millions and millions and millions of dollars in bonuses, but then your healthcare workers are struggling for every dollar and then the next thing that reimbursements are being slashed, so now you have less incentive to work. So that's one part of it, is to how do you actually equitably incentivize your workers to do a job in terms of and this is not about the political argument of minimum wage and things like that. This is about people who are professionals, people who have given a lot of their lives to a career, who aren't getting the fair share. But then when you look at the executives that are making, where they say Blue Cross Blue Shield, United Healthcare or whatnot, post $1 billion profit for the year or whatever numbers that they post, then you look at your own pocketbook and your own bank accounts as a doctor, and you say, well, wait a second, these guys are the health executives. You're providing them the patients and the billing, but then you're also not getting the fair reimbursement. So that's the first part, I would say, is a fiscal overhaul of the medical system, because everything does boil down back to the dollar for these people. The second part I would say is that it is unlawful to put certain food eateries in a hospital. Okay. You can't have a cardiac center and a cancer center next to a Chick-fil-A. That doesn't work. You can't do that. That just doesn't, yes, it's good for business again, because the more unhealthy patients you have, the better they're going to come back. But at the same time, feed them actual food. It doesn't have to be expensive. Just feed them actual food. It's not processed. That doesn't have hyper palatable features to it so that you're making them get sicker. So that would be another part. And then everything that she said, I would 100% do in terms of improving efficiency, improving when you do certain things, have non-patient care days to come in and take care of all those other kind of truthfully annoying things that you have to do as a healthcare worker to satisfy your ability to work. I think also the other part of it is that just understanding that I think there's a lot of pointing of fingers that happens in organizations, that everybody's in this together to help patients. You're there to help patients. That's the person who you should be, like, if you spent 10 extra minutes with a patient, you should actually be rewarded. You shouldn't be dinged,
Yeah.
because you actually took care of them better. You connected with them. You answered more questions. So now they're going to have less questions about possibly, maybe they heard you say, take, 5 milligrams when you said 50, and now they're underdosed or something. Or like, yes, it should be all documented and whatnot, but something very small like that. Or did the doctor have a chance to connect with the family and make a better connection? And actually, it's an interesting kind of observation, is that I've never actually seen my brother, who's a hospitalist and internist, work, but the kind of what we hear from our friends and other people that know him in both the social and professional capacity, they always say, yeah, Kunal's very thorough with his patients, and he's always spending a lot of time in the patient rooms with the families because he cares. He cares about the patient's success. He cares about the families having all their questions answered. But yet, he gets dinged for that. He doesn't get awarded. And that's another part where, like, we need to change the rhetoric of what does good patient care really mean? Does it mean that you check them out of the hospital and you got them discharged by noon the next day? Or does it mean that you actually took care of their malady that brought them to the hospital in the first place? And so I think that there's a lot of things that need to be changed in terms of what you're actually rewarding. Because when hospitals are dinging the doctors or dinging the nurse, and then the doctor gets upset because the nurse didn't check out the patient or the resident didn't do it on time, that's because the insurance company won't pay the doctor. That's why they're getting upset. They're getting upset because their paycheck is contingent upon them following a certain rule, but that rule is only in benefit of that corporate CEO or executive being able to live a certain lifestyle with that on the backs of all these other individuals. So, and I get it. I'm not anti-capitalist at all. I'm not against profits and whatnot, but have some humanity in terms of running these organizations. And I think that's the part of healthcare that needs to be re-injected at a very maximal dose. That we have lost our humanity as healthcare organizations. We've lost our reason of why. I think when you remember the reason of why you're there as an executive, as a administrator, as a doctor, a nurse, the person who's serving coffee, the janitor who's sweeping the floor, it's for the patients. That's why you're there. And so if everybody understands that purpose, you see each other as equivalents. The person who's sweeping the floor is just as important as the person checking the person in, just as important as the surgeon who's doing the surgery. All of those people have an important role in the care of the patient. And I think when everybody understands that, everybody's going to be on the same page. But unfortunately, there's a lot of like, well, I'm the department head, or I'm this, or I'm that. There's a lot of ego that gets involved too. So I think once you kind of distill that all out, then it definitely would create a better environment.
Yeah. Powerful words. Yeah. And
Well,
yeah.
so simple, but yeah. I think simpler things. I was just thinking about this show. I saw it on TV a while back, and I can't remember which one it was. Some drama, healthcare drama, where they had like put in a green room, just like a room of nature, and they basically showed that patients did better if they spent time in there. And so then a lot of the doctors on the show, it's probably like Grey's Anatomy or something, but that they started spending time in there when they were stressed and feeling more calm. And it's just like simple things like that to improve, the call rooms. Like, why can't they be a little nicer? Why do they have to be, these really sterile feeling, not comfortable? You don't get quality sleep even if you have the opportunity to sleep. just like the patients with the dinging of the bell, it's the same kind of concept. Like you're just not making anything easier or more comforting about the place that you are. And I think a lot of corporate America, tech America has done that, right? Like they have high quality, they
Yeah.
have wellness pods, and they have like
Yeah.
gym facilities. So yeah, like if you want to take your lunch break, your 30 to 45 minutes of due time to go walk on a treadmill or go to a green room or like sunbathe, that's fine. You can do that. You know, most of us in healthcare don't have that even existing. Like that does not exist. So your options are you pack your own lunch or you go eat at a Chick-fil-A. You know, like that's really it. Where I'm at, you know, we're really trying to help our staff because there really isn't. There's no break room. There's no place where they can like really have lunch that's just their own and sit and talk. And that is very different from where I used to be, where, you know, a lot of our staff, you know, they won't leave because that's their family because they know each other. They spend a lot of time talking. That whole social component of society used to be very much like in your job, right? Like you would go to work and these people knew everything about you because like all of us had our work husband and our work wife because that
Yeah.
was your person you told everything to about, who knew you just
Yeah.
as well as probably your spouse did. I
Mm.
think a lot of that has broken down with you know, after COVID, and then where time is spent and resources, and that there's not that place for that. Like I know with my techs right now, you know, I feel there's like a little divide with a lot of them, and I told the manager like it'd be nice if they could have their lunch together because that's what I used to see before, and it just changes. You just know each other. You know, you complain about your kid and what they did at school yesterday, or your mother-in-law, your father-in-law, whatever it is. It makes you um, care about each other in a different way, and that totally changes the work dynamic. Because it doesn't just become like always the job. It's really your career and your, you know, career family. So I think that was very common before, that people really had their like work family, and now it feels different. And I think that that's something that everyone should kind of strive towards getting back to. You know, return to the outings with friends from work and the social hours and like some of the social parts of the job that people like really COVID, at least here, killed most of that. And it's been very hard to get everybody back on the same page. Even like simple things like department meetings used to always be in person, and they used to usually be over like a dinner. So yeah, it was a night away from your family, but like you kind of got to hang out with your coworkers, and a little bit, it was usually serious conversation about work stuff, but
Bit of
always you're sharing a
fun.
meal. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a little different, right?
Yeah.
And now that's all gone to Zoom, you know, and
Yeah.
once it's gone to Zoom, it's been very hard. I mean, we've got leadership who keeps asking, like, when can we kind of meet again in person? How about quarterly? And it's like, no one wants to do it, you know, it just won't happen. And so then you don't even know what half the people look like face to face anymore, right? It's just what you see. And a lot of people just do audio call in, so you don't even see them on the Zoom anymore. And it's made it very easy to point, like you said, point fingers at who's doing what, because you're not really like collegial per se. Like you're not like saying, I think the term colleagues means more than a coworker, right? So everyone's just kind of become a coworker versus like a colleague in many circumstances. So anything
Yeah.
to foster that, I think always is, if you can be friends with the people you work with, you tend to have each other's back. You tend to support each other in different ways. You tend to make all of life a little bit easier. And hopefully, like, you know, everyone can kind of move towards that again.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that the shift working, you know, it's our own little shift working family, isn't it? They really do become our family. And yeah, it is. It's that craving, that connection again, that face to face. I'm starting to see it come back a little bit, but I think, as you said, Avita, I get, you know, from a cost perspective too. I think organisations think it's way cheaper just to do it on a Zoom, and it's more convenient and so forth. But
Yeah.
yeah, powerful, powerful. Thank you. So I'm just a bit mindful of the time because I know that it's going into the evening for the two of you. So I guess if there's any parting comments that you'd both like to share that we haven't perhaps covered on the conversation today that you think that would be beneficial for our listeners.
I would say to share your Healthy Shift Worker podcast with other people, because the more you actually share this information, the more it disseminates, and the more that this information disseminates, then the more impact it makes. So I think that would be the first part, not just our episodes, but your podcast in general. I think you're doing great work, Audra. So keep that up in that respect. So that'd be my first parting comment. And then I think the second parting comment is that, I think as long as you have the right intention and you even say, okay, today I'm going to do this one wellness kind of intervention for let's say a manager or a department head is listening to this. If some light bulb goes off in their head or we made an impact on them, and they say, okay, we're going to have a group walk today around the hospital at lunch. Everybody come down. We're going to put our sneakers on and we're going to just go for a walk together. Even if it's whether it's a nice day outside, you can walk outside if there's a courtyard or something. If there's not, maybe you're walking down the corridors, and just do something like that. Even if it's one wellness thing that you're able to do and just get the ball rolling, that's important. It's not always that wellness is this perfect environment. I mean, if you look at, not to go into a tangent, but the blue zones, you have all these centenarians. They don't have apps. They don't have, watches. They don't have they don't listen to podcasts. They just live their life because they know what to do for their wellness. So it's just those simple little things like, are you eating whole foods versus foods that were packaged and processed? If you could maybe as a department encourage that once a week, we're going to serve whole food, plant-based foods to the staff. Great. That's at least a change in the right direction to say, okay, at least one day a week, I know I'm getting a good meal at work. Those things help kind of set the tone to kind of mimic kind of what Evita was saying with the tech companies like Google, et cetera, that set the stage for that, to make the work environment more conducive as well as more inviting, and a place where you want to go. When you wake up in the morning, you should want to go to work and do that. Those are certain things I would say is that, just get the ball rolling. And then see how one thing maybe stack on another, and then that stacks on another, and before you know it, you've created a lifestyle.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, maybe appoint a healthy shift worker ambassador of sorts to get that ball rolling. But anyway, over to you, Evita. Have you got anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, I guess if you are a shift worker or someone who, I guess we all are, we just discussed, right? So, knowing that there are so many more resources out there and kind of going in with your eyes wide open. So, especially if you're just starting, you're in residency or you've just started nursing school or whatever it may be, or, there's a million jobs now that are shift work. So, whoever you are, read about it a little bit, right? Okay, what things can I do to kind of optimize, just that little stuff, take a nap before, or wear the blue light glasses, or avoid melatonin if you're this type of person, walking, all these little things that we knew nothing about in our time, which wasn't even that long ago, honestly, is great. And it's very, we're not perfect, even though, I'm living with this, functional medicine physician and everyone expects for me to be super healthy and do all of this. And true, if I just lived that exact life that he is prescribing, but I'm a different person and, we all have those goals, but reality is I go to work outside the house and there are chips and sometimes I have chips, and sometimes I have a latte and maybe I'll have the brownie, because someone brought it to work. So we're not perfect. But these little small things of I myself, if I'm caught up and I have no patients waiting and the techs are at lunch, I go for a walk outside. There's nothing, I'm not at all impacting anyone in a negative way by me taking a break to go walk outside and not feeling guilty for that, not feeling you're doing something wrong because other people aren't doing it. Other people should be doing it. And maybe this will start a movement that, you're doing still great work, professional work, and still taking care of yourself, or encouraging, your workplace to say, okay, you have a gym on site. Can we use it a couple hours out of the day when patients are not here, before or after work or whatever? These things are, again, you don't know until you ask. So I just think that, that there are options and information that people did not have before to make the shift work life maybe a little bit less taxing than it naturally will be. and B, that you shouldn't feel guilty for doing small things that will improve your overall health and wellness for yourself, as long as they're not impacting your professionalism in a way that would be, a detriment. And that hopefully you can get everyone on board. And then I think the third small thing is like you just said, it is really important to rebuild that society, that culture that is people based in jobs now and careers. And so suggesting little things, whether that's having like a colleague over for dinner at your house, if that's like the most that you can do, or just meeting up for after work, beverage or walk or whatever it is that you're able to do, I mean, makes the world of difference. And once that ball starts getting rolling, then, I always say like, oh, well, so-and-so will hear about it, and then they'll have FOMO, fear of missing out. And the next thing you know, they'll want to join for lunch the next day or something to rebuild that social network that is honestly what keeps half those blue zones, ahead of even those of us who try to eat well and exercise. It's the stress component that seems to still affect most of us the most.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we'd all like to live the perfect blue zone lifestyle, but it's not sort of practical.
And climate.
Well, this is this has been a great conversation. Thank you so much for sort of sharing a little bit more of insights on your own journeys. And I like that we've been able to sort of have it as both of you on the podcast at the same time as well, and with a little bit of a surprise edition there with your daughter putting in a bit of a surprise appearance with her.
Part of the conversation.
She didn't get the invitation but decided to join us anyway. Yeah, I love it. It's being authentic. It's being it's keeping things real, isn't it, too? And also too, Evita, I love that you said that yes, even though you're married to a functional medicine doctor, you're not perfect. You're going to go and do things that because it's just life, but you just do the best that you can under the circumstances and focus on doing what you can best most of the time. So yeah.
And not feel guilty about it, and not feel guilty about it. Yeah.
I don't judge. Yeah. Because at the end of the day, I'm human, and I enjoy my life just like any other human does.
Yep.
And that's what I tell my patients. I tell them, that, if somebody enjoys, something, they should. I don't want people not to enjoy.
Yeah. Yeah. That's like a whole nother podcast of
it is.
The things that he would toss out mayonnaise and
yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, if our listeners are wanting to get in touch with you in regards to your practice, Keshav, and even Evita, would you mind just sharing with us some of the details, and I'll make sure to ensure that they're on the show notes?
Sure. So, I check my email every day, multiple times a day, actually, Dr. Grover at groverhealth.com. Mm-hmm. Feel free to reach out there. You can follow us and DM us on Instagram at Grover Health as well. And then I'm on LinkedIn if anybody wants to look me up there and message. I'm happy to connect. And then also groverhealth.com is our website. You can always submit an inquiry there too. Or to my office at info@groverhealth.com, and our staff is usually pretty good about responding. So multiple ways of getting in touch with me and my staff.
Right. Excellent.
You can, if you're interested in reaching out to me, you can always reach out to Keshav and get with me. I don't have quite the social media / website, but I do have one professional email that I'm happy to share just in case, which is gmail.com, which is just evitasingHMD@gmail.com. And just I guess I'm on LinkedIn as well, but
Right. Excellent. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much again for joining us and coming back for the second podcast, Keshav. And
this is fun. Yeah, I enjoy it.
Yeah, wonderful.
We hope to do it in person in Australia at some point.
Oh, what was that? Sorry?
I said we hope to do it in person in Australia at some point. That would be nice.
Yeah, yes, absolutely. Most definitely. You're most welcome to come down here. I'm not sure if I want to go over there in winter time. No offense.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's it for today's podcast episode. Thank you so very much for joining us. And please, if you found that this episode resonates and you realize that it could actually help other people, please go ahead and share it, leave a comment, even leave a rating on our Apple podcast reviews. It just helps me to share the episode and my podcast further abroad. All right, until next time.